My in-laws blamed me for not giving them a grandchild, and my ex-husband supported them despite my positive fertility results. They humiliated me by calling me a broken woman at a family dinner. That was my breaking point. I am a 32-year-old woman, and I was married to my ex-husband, Jake, who is 34, for 5 years. At first, our relationship seemed perfect. When we met, Jake was charming, funny, and easy to talk to. I truly believed I had found someone who would always have my back. But everything changed after we got married. Jake's parents, especially his mom, started pressuring us to have children almost immediately after our wedding. Initially, it was lighthearted comments like, "When are we getting a grandchild?" But soon, it became the only topic they ever wanted to discuss. For context, Jake is an only child, and his parents were always very controlling. His mom was the kind of person who had a plan for everything: how Jake should live, who he should marry, and what his future should look like. When we were dating, I didn't realize how much influence his family had over him. Jake had this constant need to gain their approval, especially his mom's, which caused a lot of tension between us after we got married. 2 years into our marriage, the pressure from his parents became unbearable. We had been trying to have children, but nothing was happening. Concerned, I decided to see a doctor to ensure everything was fine on my end. Thankfully, all my tests came back normal, which was a relief. Naturally, I suggested Jake get tested as well, just to rule out any potential issues. That's when things started to go downhill. Jake flat out refused to get tested. He acted as though I had deeply insulted him by even suggesting it. He insisted he couldn't possibly be the problem and refused to discuss it further. I was frustrated because I only wanted to figure out what was going on so we could move forward, but Jake was stuck in his prideful mindset. He acted as though it was impossible for him to have any issues, and his refusal to even consider the idea was incredibly hurtful. Meanwhile, his parents wouldn't let up with their intrusive questions and comments. Every time we visited them, they would bring up the topic of grandchildren. It got to the point where I began dreading family events because I knew that's all they'd talk about. No matter how many times I tried to explain that these things take time, Jake's mom would give me a condescending look, as if she were disappointed in me. Eventually, she stopped pretending to be subtle and started making direct comments. At one family dinner, surrounded by Jake's extended relatives, his mom loudly said, "I hope she isn't damaged," with a fake look of concern.
It was mortifying.
Jake, sitting right next to me, said nothing. He didn't defend me or even acknowledge the insult. Instead, he awkwardly laughed it off like it wasn't a big deal. That hurt more than anything else. When I brought it up to Jake later, he dismissed it, saying, "That's just her sense of humor." I felt completely unsupported. Things escalated a few months later at another family dinner. This time, Jake's mom didn't hold back. She worked herself into hysterics, crying about how old she was getting and accusing me of ruining her dreams of having grandchildren. Then, she yelled in my face, calling me a broken woman and a disgrace to womanhood. Everyone at the table stayed silent. I looked around, hoping someone would speak up, but everyone just stared at their plates. Jake's dad even nodded in agreement with his wife. Jake himself avoided eye contact, pretending nothing was happening. That was my breaking point. I couldn't believe that after everything I had been through, Jake still refused to stand up for me. Seeing him sit there silently, not even looking at me, made me realize exactly where I stood in our marriage. That night, when we got home, I packed my bags and told Jake I was leaving. He barely reacted. It was as if he didn't care. He was so used to prioritizing his parents over me that he didn't even notice he had lost me. Leaving wasn't easy, but it was the best decision I've ever made. I moved in with a friend for a few months while I figured out my next steps. I filed for divorce, and the process went surprisingly smoothly. Jake didn't fight it, and we ended things quietly. After the divorce, I focused on rebuilding my life. I got back into my career, surrounded myself with supportive friends, and eventually met someone new, my now husband, Sam. Sam has been a complete breath of fresh air. He is the opposite of Jake in every way. He listens, communicates openly, and most importantly, he always has my back. We dated for about a year before I found out I was pregnant, and we decided to get married. This pregnancy has been incredibly meaningful to me, especially after everything I went through with Jake and his family. Sam and I are thrilled, and I've never been happier. One day, while shopping with Sam, I ran into Jake's parents at the mall. It had been 2 years since I last saw them, and I was visibly pregnant. Their reactions were priceless. They were utterly shocked. They tried to make polite small talk, but I could see the disbelief on their faces. A small part of me felt vindicated. After years of being tormented and blamed, seeing their shocked expressions felt like poetic justice. I said a quick goodbye and moved on with my day. However, about a week later, I started getting texts and calls from Jake. At first, I ignored them, figuring his parents had told him about my pregnancy and new marriage. But the messages didn't stop, so I eventually opened one. Jake was furious. His messages revealed that after his parents saw me pregnant, they confronted him about why we never had children. Apparently, they had always assumed I was the problem, and Jake never corrected them. In fact, he encouraged the idea. When they realized the truth, they were livid. They accused Jake of wasting years of their lives and cut him off completely, both emotionally and financially. Jake blamed me for everything. He claimed that if I hadn't flaunted my pregnancy in front of his parents, none of this would have happened. Jake accused me of ruining his life. He said losing his parents' inheritance, something he had been counting on, was entirely my fault. I couldn't believe the audacity. All I had done was move on with my life, and the fact that his lies came back to haunt him was not my responsibility. I didn't respond to Jake's messages, and had no plans to. I was content with my life and wanted no part in his family drama. From my perspective, Jake had dug his own grave. If he hadn't allowed his parents to treat me so poorly or lied to them about why we couldn't have children, he wouldn't be in this mess. Despite feeling strongly that I wasn't to blame, I shared the situation with a friend who offered an unexpected perspective. She said I might have been wrong for leaving Jake the way I did and suggested I should have pushed harder for him to get tested. She also implied that running into his parents while visibly pregnant was petty and unnecessary. While I could understand her point, I couldn't agree. I had tried everything I could during my marriage to make things work. Jake's refusal to even consider testing and his unwillingness to stand up for me were the real reasons I left. As for the mall incident, it wasn't something I planned, it was a chance encounter. My husband, Sam, reassured me, saying my friend's comments were baseless. Still, a small part of me wondered if there was any truth to her words. After my initial story, I thought that chapter of my life was closed. But Jake proved me wrong. He began blowing up my phone with messages and calls. I blocked his number, but he started reaching out through social media, creating new accounts whenever I blocked the old ones. He even used different phone numbers to contact me. Initially, his messages were filled with anger, blaming me for his estrangement from his parents. Over time, his tone shifted to desperation. He accused me of ruining his future and said I owed him for taking everything away. The situation was exhausting. In response to comments from my original post, I want to clarify, I tried everything to encourage Jake to get tested during our marriage. Every time I brought it up, he would shut me out, acting as though I had betrayed him. Some days, he wouldn't speak to me at all. I did everything I could to be patient, but there's only so much you can do when someone is that stubborn. As for the accusation that I flaunted my pregnancy, it wasn't intentional. Running into his parents was purely coincidental. However, I won't lie, it felt satisfying to see their shocked faces after all the humiliation they had put me through. Things took a terrifying turn when Jake somehow found out where I lived. 2 nights ago, he showed up at my house. He pounded on the door for 15 minutes, demanding to speak to me. Thankfully, Sam was home. He told Jake to leave, but Jake refused. Sam threatened to call the police, and only then did Jake back off, yelling that I had ruined everything. That incident left me shaken. Jake's behavior felt increasingly unhinged. My husband and I discussed installing security cameras and even considered filing a restraining order. I also pieced together how Jake lost his inheritance. From his furious messages, It became clear that his parents felt utterly betrayed when they realized he had let them believe I was the problem. Their entire focus had been on having grandchildren, and learning the truth made them decide Jake no longer deserved their support. Jake's situation is a result of his own actions. He could have been honest with his parents and treated me better, but he chose not to. I refuse to feel guilty for his choices. After Jake's visit to my house, I thought things couldn't escalate further, but I was wrong. He began bombarding me with messages again, this time with a new approach. Instead of his usual angry rants, he started begging for my help. His messages included phrases like, "I need you to talk to my parents, and you owe me this." He believed that if I reached out to his parents and explained everything, they would forgive him and reinstate him in their will. Jake seemed convinced that I could somehow fix his situation with a few words. At first, I thought he was joking. The idea that I would speak to his parents, let alone convince them to give him back the inheritance, was laughable. But Jake was serious. He claimed that if I hadn't run into his parents while pregnant, they would never have discovered the truth, and he'd still be set for life. The sheer audacity left me speechless. Jake couldn't grasp that this mess was entirely his doing. He had lied, manipulated, and enabled his parents to treat me horribly. Yet he believed I should clean up his mess. When I ignored his messages, Jake became increasingly desperate. His tone shifted from pleading to threatening. He sent texts like, "If you don't help me, I'll make sure everyone knows you're a liar and you'll regret this." His spiral into desperation and anger was disturbing. Despite his threats, I wasn't scared. I had dealt with enough of his nonsense to know he was mostly talk. Still, I was cautious. My husband and I installed security cameras around our home and contacted a lawyer to discuss obtaining a restraining order. To make matters worse, Jake's parents started spreading rumors about me. They told mutual acquaintances that I was responsible for their family falling apart. They believed I had manipulated Jake into lying and hiding the truth. It was infuriating, but I decided not to engage. Addressing their accusations would only give them more ammunition to drag me into their drama. This will likely be my last update, as things have finally reached a conclusion. After Jake's relentless harassment and his parents' rumors, my husband and I decided it was time for a fresh start. We packed our belongings and moved to a new state without telling anyone where we were going. But before we left, something unexpected happened. Jake's parents finally confronted him directly. According to a mutual acquaintance, the confrontation was explosive. At first, Jake tried to pin all the blame on me, claiming I had manipulated him into keeping secrets. However, his parents weren't buying it. They demanded to know why he needed the inheritance so badly. It turns out Jake had been lying to everyone, not just his parents. While he pretended to be a responsible son saving money and working hard, he had actually been wasting their financial help on gambling and frivolous expenses. His parents discovered that he had squandered the assets they helped him acquire, including a house and investments. When the truth came out, his parents were livid. They officially disowned Jake and made it clear they wanted nothing to do with him. The inheritance he had been so desperate to secure was completely gone. Hearing this gave me an overwhelming sense of relief. For years, I had doubted myself, wondering if I had failed as a wife or hadn't done enough to fix things. But learning the truth validated my decision to leave. Jake's downfall was a result of his own actions, not mine. Since moving, my husband Sam and I have been focusing on our future. We're thrilled about our baby and enjoying a peaceful life far from Jake's chaos. We installed security measures just in case, but so far, there's been no sign of Jake or any new harassment. Surprisingly, Jake's parents reached out to me through a mutual relative. They apologized for how they treated me during my marriage and admitted they had been wrong to believe Jake's lies. While their apology was unexpected, I'm unsure if I'll respond. It's comforting to know they finally see the truth, but I've moved on and don't want to reopen old wounds. Looking back, I'm grateful for the strength I've found to leave a toxic situation. The past few years were challenging, but I've come out stronger and happier. I'm excited for this new chapter with my husband and baby, and I'm finally at peace. Thank you to everyone who supported me through this journey. Your advice and encouragement have meant the world to me. For the first time in years, I can focus on the future without the weight of the past holding me back. This is the end of my story and the beginning of a brighter, drama-free life.